Morning. So thank you very much for that introduction, which was written by my mother. And so my career really took off when my mum took charge of my CV, because she is the only person who believed any of what you've just heard. And it's great to see all of you, because when I arrived earlier today, there was no one here, and that was a bit alarming. So it's very alarming when you're speaking, you turn up and a big room like this, there's no one there. It's a bit like, you know, that experience you have when you're throwing a party and you kind of clear your house up and you get changed and you put out the food and the drink and so on and so forth, and the appointed hour comes and no one arrives. And then you think you're really sad, you've got no friends at all, it's going to be a complete disaster. Why on earth did you even think about having a party? And then 20 minutes after the party's due to start, finally the doorbell rings and you kind of feel this wave of relief go through you, and you open the door and there is your most socially dysfunctional friend who you kind of worried about inviting, and so you entertain him for about 20 minutes with his grey shoes. And then, of course, all your friends come and then they spend all their time in the kitchen. So speaking is a bit like that. It's kind of always nice to see people turn up. A friend of mine once went to Canada to give a presentation, and it was in the winter, just the start of the winter, and he had to go to this resort up in the mountains. He took this little twin-prop plane, like a little Cessna, landed in this resort, and it started blowing this amazing blizzard, the worst blizzard they'd had for 15 years or something. And when he woke up the next morning, the entire resort was snowbound. I mean, it was just huge snow drifts. It was still blowing a blizzard. Nothing was moving. No planes, no buses, no cars or anything. So he got down to the conference hall, which was about as big as this. It took 600 people. It was freezing cold, and there was one person in the audience. So he thought, crikey, this guy has turned up in such horrible conditions. I'd better give him my presentation. So my friend took to the stage, did his presentation, PowerPoint, the whole lot. The audience absolutely loved it, stood up, gave him a standing ovation. So my friend's really pleased. He gets down from the stage, he's about to walk off, and the guy in the audience stops him and says, "Can I just ask you a question? Where are you going?" And my friend said, "Well, I thought I'd go to my room and have a hot shower and warm up, actually." And the guy in the audience says, "You can't go now, I'm the next speaker." So it's always nice to see an audience. So in the next sort of 50 minutes or 45 or whatever it is, I just want to try and do three things and say a little bit and then ask you to talk about the kind of some of the ideas that I've introduced. And roughly speaking, I just want to talk about what are we learning for, what's the point of what we do, what are we trying to equip young people for, what kind of ingredients would you bring together to make that possible, and how would you create those kinds of experiences? What kind of teaching, what kind of schools, what kind of structure, what kind of design would you bring to all of that? So I just want to start with this question, which is, what are we learning for? What's it all about? What's the point? Is it about NAPLAN or ATAR or the number of kids you get into college or their test scores or your position in the PISA rankings? Or is it about something else? And one way of answering this question is to think about the kind of world that we're in and how we're preparing young people for it and what it looks like and what kinds of capabilities, skills and knowledge they're going to kind of need for that kind of world. So I'm just going to show you one simple-ish diagram which I think explains the kind of world we're in. This is a red line. This line is going down. This is a line you don't want to be on. This is the line of decline. This is the line of fewer people, fewer profits, fewer targets, whatever it is. This is a bad line. This is a good line. This is a line going up. This is a kind of line of growth and opportunity, of new things, of innovation, so on and so forth. And one of the stories that we tell about the world is there's a lot more of the green line than there used to be, because there's a lot more innovation, entrepreneurship, possibility, new technologies, new ways of doing things. Who here has used TripAdvisor? So everyone has used TripAdvisor. Is there anyone here who doesn't have WhatsApp? There's a couple of people who don't have. We'll have to get you signed up soon. The entire room is currently communicating using WhatsApp. WhatsApp, starts from nothing, comes in over the top of all the other mobile networks. It disintermediates a lot of other people virtually out of nowhere. Airbnb, who's currently, you're all in education, you must use Airbnb. In fact, your flats are probably all on Airbnb now, aren't they? Because you're here. Who's used Airbnb? So 75% of the room has used Airbnb. Airbnb starts as couch surfing, starts as people just sharing rooms, and they just sort of commercialize that and turn it into something that operates as a global platform. They don't own any rooms, they don't have any staff, they have zero costs, and they're virtually the largest hotel chain in the world now, in effect. So new things can come out of nowhere, and in that world, old things can suddenly seem outmoded. They can seem left behind, detached, slow, rooted. And so our world is this strange mixture of paralysis and fluidity. That there are all these things that are incredibly fluid and fast-moving, and there are these other things which are kind of clinging on. And that, in a way, is education. Because we live in a world where the kids that we work with are part of this incredibly fluid world, and then education appears to them, feels to them, as this thing which is fixed and static and solid and gridded and so on and so forth. And so if that is the kind of story we are told, actually it's a bit more complicated, because what really happens, and the interesting place, is when these two lines come together. Because then you get this kind of turmoil of the old trying to change and the new trying to be born. And actually what a lot of people are doing in their lives is trying to make sense of what that is, and how to combine these things together. And when then you get that, what you get out of the middle of it is lots of hybrids. It's lots of different things coming out of it. So if you think about who here has used Uber. Lots of people have used Uber. Uber is a new thing, comes out of nowhere, almost. And you've got traditional cabs, but you've also got Drive Now, Lyft, social car. You've got autonomous cars coming. You'll have car companies offering driverless vehicles or drive-by deals that you can get a subscription to a service from a car company. So actually out of the middle of all of that, we're going to see a kind of explosion of different things emerging. The same will be true in banking. The same is happening in media, that you're getting this kind of growth of all these different ways of doing things. And the young people that we're educating are right in the middle of it. And they want to be, that is where they're going to make their livings, create their organizations, so on and so forth. So what we have to prepare them for, I think, is a world where they're in that blue circle in the middle, where they're constantly open to new things, but they're often dealing with institutions which are trying to change. And that is what it feels like a lot of the time in education. So I don't know if is this a good description of anyone's working life here? Does this sort of sum up what it feels like? Because in a way, that is what it should feel like. It should feel like you're in a kind of washing machine, that things are tumbling together and being mixed up. That actually the only way to respond to a world like this is to constantly combine and recombine. So just now, before I was speaking to Kathy down here, and she was talking about Fairfield Public School, mixing formative learning with professional learning communities, formative assessment, professional learning communities, and self-organized learning. That's a kind of new combination. That's a product of the washing machine. You have to put new things in and try and mix them up in different ways. So if this is the kind of world, roughly speaking, that young people are going to operate in, we have to give them experiences of what it's going to be like to live in it. So the red line, that's Jeb Bush, the red line. The red line is 9 months ago, Jeb Bush says, and the Republican Party say, this is our party, we organized this, he is our candidate, this is going to be about him fighting Hillary Clinton, and Jeb Bush is on the red line because he thought he owned that space, but he didn't count with this. And I don't think anyone here counted with this. So it's a kind of, he resembles Benito Mussolini more and more each day with that incredible hair. But actually, he's captured some sort of mood amongst large numbers of people who feel left behind by globalization, change, and technology. And so suddenly, out of nowhere, you get an entire institution, the Republican Party, disrupted by someone coming out of, who's not a politician, who's a kind of mixture between a sort of entertainer and a billionaire property developer. And suddenly in the middle, in that vortex, is American politics being changed as we speak. Bernie Sanders emerging out of that green line, Hillary Clinton and the Democrat institutions kind of just about clinging on and hoping to fight him off. So that is the kind of world we're in. It's a washing machine world. So you can feel this, I think, out there in the world, but I think a lot of people can feel it in their organizations too. That you feel this pull between, we've got to do things in a traditional way because that's how we know how to do things, and we can't throw everything out because otherwise we'll feel a bit lost, but we've got to try and accommodate these new things that are going on, these new techniques, technologies, pedagogies, whatever it is, and somehow we've got to create a combination of doing them together as we move forward. And so a lot of organizations, public and private, that I deal with, they feel like they're in a kind of civil war, that they're pulled in these different directions. And the job of leading them and working in them and trying to regenerate them is to try and create these combinations. So that's my first question. Just spend a couple of minutes around your tables talking to the people next to you about whether these images make sense of the world that you think you're in and that your young people are in. Does this help explain what they're trying to do and what you're trying to do with them, this combination? And what does it feel like if you are in the middle of that washing machine? How do you make that feel like something that's creative and generative rather than something that's simply dizzying and sick-making? So take a couple of minutes, just look at that and discuss with people around your table whether you think that helps you make sense of your world. Okay, colleagues. So I'm not going to delay us. I'm assuming that you're giving one another lots of feedback. So if we think that there is something in this, then I'm also wondering whether this looks like a picture of education in a way. What kind of images we have of the system that we're running, because there's this sort of powerful sense that there is incredibly powerful forces running through society, which young people are being carried by, contributing, and are making. And education is sort of like this bridge. It's kind of holding in there with the water flowing around it. And if you look over a bridge and you see the water going past the pillars of the bridge, what you see as it goes past is it creates these kind of eddies and kind of periods of turbulence, if you like, that go on down the river, these swirling patterns. And in a way, I feel that's what education must be like for young people, that there's a certain sort of structure and there's a certain sort of flow. And if we want education to be really creative, we have to think of it as something that flows, that's fluid, rather than, I guess, the main, I mean, who here in this room works completely? Does anyone in this room work completely without a timetable? So everyone's got a timetable. Well, you work without a timetable. I know Peter Hutton here at Templestowe is talking later. They have a timetable which young people can create for themselves. But that's not a timetable. And if the world looks like that, if this is a better description of the kind of world that young people are growing up in, then actually giving them experiences which depends on grids, timetables, tests, lessons, bells, so on and so forth, doesn't adequately prepare them for this kind of world. So in a way, thinking about education and our institutions as if they're more like fluids than machines might be a better mental model. But it's a difficult model because these things are much more difficult to control, predict, manage, so on and so forth. So this is a picture of an experiment that a guy called Maurice Couette, a French fluid dynamicist, did in the late 19th century. And what Couette did was take a big cylinder like a barrel, put in the middle of it another cylinder, which he turned round, and then he watched what happened to the water. And the water started by being still, and then started to move around, because as the cylinder moves, the water gets pushed out to the edge, and then it comes back round. An English scientist called Taylor then amended it so that as well as the inside cylinder moving, the outside cylinder moved as well, but in the opposite direction. So this is a picture of Taylor's experiment, where the inside cylinder is moving clockwise, and the outside cylinder is moving anti-clockwise. And so they start moving together. And what happens if you do that experiment is that you see this pattern emerging. That first of all, at a very low rate of revolutions, the water doesn't really move. And then as it starts to rise, it assumes this sort of regular pattern, but it's quite, it's very, very fluid. So it's both structured and fluid. And I sort of think that's what education's got to be like. It's got to be both structured and fluid. It's got to be able to move and adjust and be incredibly energetic, but it's also got to have a certain kind of structure. And I think the best places to learn are going to be like that, and they're going to make the most of this combined motion. Because in a way, the inside cylinder is the demands of the system going in one direction, and the outside cylinder is the demands of society and young people almost going in another direction. And it's a combination of the two which is going to drive what real change is like within schools. And this is a picture of what happens inside that cylinder when you get that kind of motion. So what would it be like if our images of schools and places to learn were more like this? And what would we have to encourage young people to learn to cope with a world that was this fluid? So if you're in that washing machine world, if you're learning to work in the washing machine, I think it's really simple. It comes down to a very simple thing, which is education designed as instruction so you follow instructions, which I think is what mass education has been. It's been about following instructions. Can you follow instructions? Can you do what is required at the right time, in the right way, just as you're asked to do by the examiner? If that is the HSE, the VSE, and so on and so forth, if that is the test, then the thing is to follow instructions. But if you're living in this world, actually following instructions all of the time isn't going to work because it's too fluid and it's too dynamic. So if the underlying curriculum of schools, whatever the content, is follow instructions, that only works if there are always going to be problems with instructions attached. Now, if the entire world were made by IKEA, that would be fine, because then you would just try and follow the instructions. And of course, if you're going to cook a new dish, you follow the recipe. And if you want to learn how to do it, you watch someone who's good at it, or you take advice from someone who knows how to do it. So I'm not suggesting that following instructions is a stupid thing to do. It's just that many of the opportunities and many of the problems of the world that young people are going into don't have instructions. They won't have a manual. And actually, how many young people want to read a manual? I mean, they expect to be able to do things without reading manuals because they're designed for them to experiment with. So if you want an education designed for this world, it has to be about finding and solving problems. Part of that might be to follow instructions, but part of it is going to be other things. Why is that so? Well, in that very kind introduction, you heard me described as someone who's interested in innovation and trends and all the rest of it. The truth is, my one insight into the world is my youngest son. And all I used to do, basically, was just watch what he did, and then I would go and talk to companies about it. He's 16 now, so he hasn't actually spoken to me for about 3 years. So this has closed off my kind of vantage point into the future. So what I do now is basically just sort of stalk people and watch what they do. And let me just tell you 2 stories which, in a way, try and sum up why the world is shifting in this direction. And the first is a story about shopping. So I get off the tube, the underground in London, at my stop, Highbury and Islington. And supermarkets have opened up branches around the tube station, so there's been a shift away from these big supermarkets, drive in your car, load up for the week, to supermarkets where you shop daily and kind of take stuff home. And there's also been the introduction of the self-service till. Everyone here used a self-service till? So I'm standing in the queue at Waitrose at Highbury Corner, and I'm thinking, I'm an independent person. I've got a degree in philosophy and politics. I should be capable of using this self-service till. I'm going to show how capable I am. I am going to go to the self-service till. And so I get to the self-service till, and of course on the 3rd item, some flashing signal comes up on the screen which says, call the assistant manager, wait for instructions. And then the entire queue looks at me and thinks, why is that old geezer trying to use the self-service till? He should be with a carer, or he shouldn't be allowed out on his own. And you feel completely incompetent as the kind of person comes and punches in the number and shows you how to do it and so on and so forth. But I'm dogged and persistent, so I keep on trying to do it. And eventually, on the 20th time that I use the self-service till, I kind of get this kind of rhythm where you kind of pass it over, you get that pleasing beep sound, and you put it in your bag. And by the end, when I've managed to do an entire bag of shopping without making a mistake, I feel like cheering, you know, and I leave the supermarket punching the air. I have just become a shop assistant. For 5 minutes, I've become a bona fide shop assistant. That is what Waitrose has persuaded me is a good thing to do. And I look at the person whose job it is to stand there and do that for people, and I think, I wonder what they feel. They must feel, God, these people are doing me out of a job by doing it themselves. And I feel kind of torn about that. And then I think, it's crazy, isn't it, that we would design any human job for someone to stand there all day just doing that. I mean, that's a job for a machine. Those barcodes were not put on by humans. Why should they be scanned out by humans? So in a way, actually, that isn't a job that we should be doing in a way. We should be doing things that we're really good at, which are solving problems, being creative, being empathetic, dealing with people, collaborating, creating, so on and so forth. So that dilemma is going to come back time and time again now. Because if a job is routine, it's almost certain that people will start finding a way to do it with technology that will displace human routine labor. And so if we train people to be good at following instructions and following rules, actually computers and intelligent machinery will always do that better. We are training people to be second-rate robots. And if we train them to be second-rate robots, they won't have a future. So there is no future in routine learning for routine jobs. That whole production line of routine learning for routine jobs is going to run into the buffers. So what would we do to equip people for a world where they've got to solve problems and create solutions rather than follow instructions? Well, the schools that I've looked at around the world, including several here in Australia, which I think do that, do, I think, these 4 things. And they bring them together really effectively. The first is they really take knowledge seriously. They think that learning is about the acquisition of knowledge. They take basic skills seriously, literacy and numeracy. So Stacey Quince, who's here from Campbelltown, would say at her creative and performing arts school, you can't do creative problem solving that well unless you've got basic skills of reading and writing. But actually those basic skills need to be then parlayed into other things. And of course, core content, which helps you understand who you are, where you've come from, the history of the country that you're part of, geography, core mathematics, so on and so forth, all of that matters as well to being part of society and a citizen. But actually, the big gains are when you get into much more interdisciplinary knowledge, conceptual thinking, critical thinking, where you start mixing ideas up and applying them in new and different ways. And so the schools that I've been to that I think really address this start with knowledge, and they take it more seriously because you can get information from Google than they would have done in the past, because actually if you can get information from everywhere, what really matters is what you can do with it, how you can mix it up, how you can create new combinations. The second thing that they take really seriously are personal strengths. That actually all learning, because learning involves this leap to acquire new knowledge and integrate it with old, requires persistence. So Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset, Angela Duckworth's work on persistence and grit, of course, Ken Robinson's work on purpose and passion, all of these are pointing us in the direction that what you know matters, but what you do with what you know matters more. And to do something with it, you need persistence, resilience, and a sense of purpose. You need to be able to recover from setbacks, learn how to pick yourself up and go again. You can't solve problems on your own, by and large. Most innovation is a highly collaborative, very convivial, very conversational thing. You need to combine your strengths, ideas, and skills with other people. So if you're going to educate people for a world where they're going to solve problems, you need to educate them to be social, to respect the ideas of other people, to negotiate, agree, to support, to inquire, to appreciate, to communicate, to empathize. Our great advantage compared with robots is our capacity for empathy, to make leaps of emotion and imagination to step inside the minds and lives of other people. And so we need education which absolutely makes that core to what people do, to the experience of being at school. And finally, I think they encourage agency. They create a culture in which young people feel that they are the agents of change within that culture, that they're not just on the receiving end. Now, virtually every place I've been to, young people at some time want to be led in learning. They want some degree of instruction. They respect teachers who are knowledgeable. They like turning for advice, but they also want to be agents. They want to shape what they're doing. And the most important thing in that little list there is that they want to make. They want to come to school to make things, whether it's a play, a program, a piece of music, a business, you name it. They want to feel it's a productive activity. And so they want to do that also by serving other people and contributing to their community. So if we were to imagine learning for a world of the washing machine, actually schools would be startup communities. There would be places you come to create things, make things, and contribute to the wider community, and to learn in the process of doing that. After the tea break, Peter Hutton's going to be talking about Templestowe, and Templestowe College in Victoria is a fantastic example of a school which puts agency and making right at the heart of its culture. So I think the places that I've been to which really do this manage to create these four things together. I'll give you one example. I've been to schools all over the place. The most radical place I've been to is a place in Barcelona called Col·legi Montserrat, run by nuns. Sister Monica Horsch is the kind of pedagogical lead in that school. It's like mixing Larry Rosenstock from High Tech High with Maria from The Sound of Music. And if you put them together, you get Col·legi Montserrat. And what Sister Monica Horsch says is, what we have found is that to get them to want to learn, you have to make it matter. And to make it matter, they have to see that it's something meaningful to them, and especially if by using it, they're helping to contribute to society and help someone else, then they'll start pulling what they need to learn to them by creating that thing. So at the start of the year, the entire staff spend a year before the school starts planning how to meet the requirements of the Spanish national curriculum entirely through project-based learning. So at the moment, I said, give me an example. And she said, well, at the moment, one of the biggest things affecting all of Europe, which is provoking a kind of existential crisis in Europe, are refugees. So what we're doing as a school is we're building houses for refugees. And we're not coming up with designs, we're not drawing pictures, we're not doing work experience, we're building houses. We're actually building houses and providing them for refugees. But if you're going to really do that for real people, you need to know what you're doing. And so when you think then about the range of disciplines and knowledge that would go into designing and building and providing houses, that's quite a lot. And that really animates them. So Sister Monica says, if you can find the thing that really interests them, and you can design learning around that, then they'll start learning. So that, I think, is a really good example of how you create these structured but dynamic experiences through which young people can learn, to combine those ingredients together. Because many of those things, persistence, resilience, collaboration, empathy, agency, you cannot instruct. It's like learning how to swim. You can't, I mean, if you're learning how to swim, of course it makes sense to have a coach and practice your strokes on the side of the pool, but no one learns to swim on the side of the pool. You have to get in the water. And of course it helps if you get in the water and you've got water wings on or a float and you've got a lifeguard and someone to coach you, but you've got to actually get in the water and feel what the water feels like. And eventually you've got to get out of your depth. That is what learning is going to have to be like. Get in the water, get in the pool. And I think that the places that I've been to create this sort of dynamic between all these ingredients. So they learn through action, but they also learn theoretically and cognitively. They take the cognitive aspects of learning very seriously, but also the non-cognitive. People learn with their head, but also with their hand. They're very personalized, but also very collaborative. They're integrating new knowledge with old knowledge in a very dynamic kind of way, and they feel like dynamic places. So, just take a look at that. That, I think, for me, is a way of thinking about how you could design learning for a world like that. That actually it needs to look a bit like that, where you're constantly combining and moving students between these experiences and building them up and creating a kind of dynamic momentum out of all these ingredients. Just take a few minutes, look at that, and have a conversation with someone else on your table about how far you think that reflects what you're doing. All schools, in my experience, have elements of this. But how far do you think you could go, or you'd want to go, or you could go to integrate these things together and to make that combination core to what you do? Is this a helpful guide to you or not? Just take 5 minutes and have a conversation about these ingredients to dynamic learning. Is there anyone here who feels they're already doing a version of this or have got some of this going on where they're working? There's someone over there kind of meekly, kind of half put, no, and then when I spotted them, they put their hand down. Sort of half there. People, who feels they've got ingredients of this going on in them? Quite a lot of people feel they've got ingredients. How many people feel that they've really got a sense of momentum, that they're developing this as the core of the school rather than sort of add-ons to it? Again, so I don't... I'm
from Fairfield Public School.
Ah, right, okay, yeah. So
we've spent 5 years trying to...
5 years.
Trying to really get some forward motion in combining the basic skills with the research and concepts behind what Dwecky's brought to us, Cash has brought to us, and
Yeah.
and all those other evidence-based
Yeah.
learning. But in particular, trying to address the high needs for our refugee students is what prompted this 5 years.
Right. So there's a great school that's Fairfield Public School. There's a great school in Melbourne called Broadmeadows Primary School, which deals with a very similar clientele, refugees, recent immigrants. And Keith, the principal there, who's been principal there for 28 years, he would say for the first 10 years that he was there, they were being nice to kids. when kids failed in terms of learning, they would think, oh, this is a kind of pastoral issue and we better kind of look after them. And then they realized that actually what they wanted to do was learn. And so, but to learn, to acquire knowledge, they had to work on those personal and emotional things in an integrated way with how they were learning to see how they work together. And that also has huge social dimensions because it's about how you collaborate, how you are with other people, how you are in the classroom, so on and so forth. And so all of that needs to go together. So one of the big problems with education is its fatal tendency to false dichotomies, to think that the cognitive and the non-cognitive, the personal and the social, the traditional and the progressive, the digital and the real are in separate worlds. And actually what the people that I've been looking at do is just disobey all of that and bring all of it together in as productive and creative a kind of way as possible. And so in the way that your colleagues just talked about at Fairfield, bringing together things that can create this new combination, formative learning, growth mindset. And the other thing a couple of other things that are striking about the places I've been to is they are all informed by research, but more than that, they are places of research. Because if you want to lead a school like this, it has to be a place where the teachers themselves are involved in a process of dynamic learning, where they're acquiring new skills, new insight, and they're drawing in ideas from outside. And they are also places which really respect data. So they're not places that just let 1,000 flowers bloom. On the contrary, because they're very driven about getting better outcomes for students, they care very much about data. So Keith at Broadmeadows would say, NAPLAN's really good for me because it gives me some benchmarks, and if I use it in the right way, I can work out what problems that I've got and where I can address things, where I need to think new things. And then they have an entire research program amongst the staff to try and develop new pedagogies. So at Broadmeadows last year, one group of staff led a project entirely about feedback, just to elaborate and create consistent but new forms of feedback in learning. So if you want to learn for this world and like that, you need dynamic, fluid learning, it seems to me. That's the way you've got to think about it. That learning is this sort of fluid process, but also structured, that can adapt and change as children adapt and change, as students acquire new knowledge, but also acquire new ambitions. And at the heart of that is, if you like, I think, a dynamic and fluid teacher. Someone who can design learning, who can sometimes instruct when it's needed, who can facilitate and coach and mentor, but most of all, who is an activator, who is a kind of creator of that spark of possibility which will excite and interest children and give them enough structure that they can then start to explore and be stretched. And so at the heart of that process of combining these different things is a highly skilled, very trusted practitioner who themselves gets enormous pleasure from being part of this dynamic process and being involved with children in that kind of learning. And the kind of environments that create this are like dynamic and fluid schools. They are places where you get these combinations happening, where there is enough structure to provide systems and progress, and so you know where children are and so on and so forth, but not so much that it dampens or extinguishes this self-organized, collaborative, animated kind of learning. And that can look all sorts of different ways. It can be purpose-built, but it can also be in scrappy schools. It can actually take place outside school, of course, much more emphasis now. Many people are putting on learning in the real world with real problems and real environments. And probably the single biggest thing that I have found that people I mean, basically, all around the world, people say, yes, we'd love to do this. We can see the sense of it. But the thing that holds us back is assessment. Because a group of principals that I was with yesterday in Victoria, as they put it, we can do this at the early years, we can do it in primary, we can even do it in years 7, 8, and even into 9, but after that, as one said, we go into lockdown. And that lockdown, which comes from the universities into the secondary schools and then feeds down, is the fear of failure at that level of examination and so on and so forth. So the single biggest blockage in education, in my view, is the way that assessment silently kills learning. That is what it is. There's a great video by a guy called Eric Mazur, who's a physicist at Harvard, called Assessment, the Silent Killer of Learning. And that is what it is, because my son, 16, doing GCSEs, I would say he hasn't learned a new thing at school for a year. What he has learned is how to do GCSEs. That is a pretty useless skill because he's never going to do them again. And actually, in the last year, his entire attitude towards the school system and education has become increasingly sort of frustrated, like it's something you have to put up with. And he goes to school because he loves being with his friends, and he quite likes it, and he likes some of the teachers. But if you asked him what new, radical, exciting thing he had learned, he wouldn't, I think, be able to say. And this is a boy growing up in a world where 16-year-olds can create businesses or write programs or make music or do any number of things, and yet the experience at school contains them. So innovation in this, and again, Peter, who's going to talk later, has been doing some amazing stuff with Templestowe and higher education establishments to break this open. And there are people all over the world trying to do that, to create new ways of thinking about how you assess and show resilience, persistence, creativity, collaboration. There are completely stupid ways of doing that, which will just lead to a tick box culture, which would be disastrous, a kind of higher school certificate in creativity, which you could then cram children for a year to make sure they get the right results. But there are really intelligent ways to do it. So Ron Berger and the expeditionary learning schools movement in the States, Ron points out that we can find ways to assess music, drama, art, whether you can mend a car, all sorts of things in performance and output, which don't require an examination, which is just done by an individual. So this is going to be a huge area, it seems to me. Innovation in forms of assessment, so we can enable a greater flowering of the real things that people need. So if you feel that you're part of all of that, the good news is that you are not like Matt Damon, you are not alone. So I think the most interesting and uplifting thing about education at the moment is that worldwide, literally worldwide, there is a movement developing which wants to do things in a different way. And this is not a progressive movement, it's not a radical movement, it's not an alternative movement, it's an absolutely mainstream movement. And it's a mainstream movement because teachers want to do a better job for students and students want better outcomes. It's fundamentally been driven by that combination. But there are some other ingredients as well. Some of the most potent, powerful, and influential voices for a different approach are coming from employers. So all over the world, whether it's digital employers in the US and Europe or the World Economic Forum, they are amongst the most potent critics of standardized, instruction-based, tick box kind of education. Hit the target, but miss the point. So they are being joined by academics who are providing more and more research informed by neuroscience about how we learn. Carol Dweck, Angela Duckworth, John Hattie's fantastically influential work. That is being amplified by foundations who are investing in it, whether it's the Hewlett Foundation or the RSA in the UK. And so what I think you're seeing is a coming together of lots of different people who want to do things in a different way. And the biggest blockages to that, there are three really. The first is that parents need to be brought along. Parents need to be assured that rather than taking risks with their children, this is actually giving them a better future. Because you can get great results and still be in a dead end, basically. That you can have a fantastic route into university, but that doesn't necessarily equip you to be an entrepreneur or a creative problem solver or someone who can think on their feet. And it doesn't necessarily give you a secure route into the job market. So we have to bring parents with us. We have to, I think, bring politicians with us who are also incredibly risk averse because they would prefer to be able to pull a lever and get better results and show they've done something rather than embark on more imaginative change. And the truth is for politicians, the truth is that actually countries will be more prosperous if they adopt these kinds of approaches in future. Because there is no future in routine learning for routine jobs. They just will not happen that way. Routine jobs are going to be done by intelligent machines. And if we want to be in a position where we're competing with machines, we'll never win in that kind of world. So actually the narrative that politicians offer about the future of society is going to have to change. And finally, one of the biggest things is universities. Universities are going to have to change because many of our assessment systems are designed to suit their needs. And the truth there is that universities themselves now face enormous changes because they realize that commodified, credentialized education is not going to be enough to really attract the kind of students that they need. So I think there are the makings of change. There is a kind of welling up, that there is a kind of growing coalition of people who want to do things in new ways. And one of the key things about them is that they believe in systems and structure and methods and research and evidence and data, but they also want to do things in new ways to create this wider mix of capabilities and skills. And that combination is extremely powerful. So this is a brilliant school that I went to in Amsterdam. There is practice like this emerging all over the place. This school, this is one of their key little tools. You start off, they've designed the classrooms, the base camp, so they're too small. So you cannot teach in classrooms. You can have meetings in the classroom, but then the children need to go and find spaces to learn throughout the school. And the school is designed as a kind of complete learning environment. So these kids will have started the day in a room with a teacher saying, this is what we're going to do today, these are your these are your targets, this is what we're going to try and achieve, these are some of the resources that you'll need, these are some of the questions we suggest you try and answer. Go off in groups, sometimes selected, sometimes self-organized, and do that. And then they're divided. So in that bottom group, those are kids who have to stay in base camp because they need to be with the teacher, because they can't yet regulate themselves to be part of the wider school. The group in the middle have to be within sight of the teacher, and the group at the top can be anywhere in the school. And as you go through the school, the number in those bottom two groups goes down and down and down. And so by the end, everyone in the last year of school should be in the top. That they should be capable of coming in, settling down, going to base camp, learning what they've got to do, and then going off and learning with other people anywhere in the school, regardless of whether they're close to the teacher or not. And so this is a thing that they've adopted from France, which is, this is them sorting out how they get on as a group, which is a self-organized, collaborative discussion that they have. All of the kind of disciplinary issues are dealt with, if you like, within these groups with the teacher, so that they get used to school being a place where you learn to govern yourselves rather than waiting to be told what to do. That's Sister Monica in the middle there with Howard Gardner at Collegi Montserrat. They've learned from Howard Gardner, from IDEO's design thinking, from project-based learning from High Tech High. They use formative assessment. They've built a rocket. They've built a rocket that goes into space. So this is a school that has taken this idea of project-based learning in a systematic way. So all throughout that school, you see scenes like this of young people together in an activated, animated discussion, thinking, questioning, arguing, but overall creating, making, and serving. And Sister Monica says, I talked to her about how they felt about preparing people for the job market and things like that. And she said, we don't like to talk to them about jobs. We don't want them particularly to think about jobs. We want them to think that they can make a difference to the world and that they will find a way when they leave to make a difference. And to do that, we need to give them experiences whilst they're at school that they can make a difference. And so this is a project-based learning plan on the wall of a school in London, School 21, that the kids are following at that school, where much of the learning is organised in these highly disciplined, with deadlines and everything, projects. And children get used to this discipline from a very early age. And this is Liam, who is about 7 years old, and I met him with his class. And their project was to explain, using a design of a board game, explain why a volcano erupted. And so the entire class is sort of beavering away, making these games. And so I sat with him, and I said, so tell me what's happening here in your game. And he said, well, this is the third draft of my game. So I said, oh, that's interesting. What was the second draft like? He said, oh, that was complete rubbish. So what they're creating in this school is a culture of self and peer assessment, of producing great work through drafting, the idea that you're never going to produce something good first time round, that you're going to have to get used to getting feedback, responding, having another go, getting feedback, responding, having another go. And most of work in this school takes 5 drafts. What they don't do is what we do most of the time, which do a piece of work, get a mark, and then move on to something else. What they do is they find something that is so enriching that they can do it 5 times and get better and better and better. And so that experience of drafting and crafting is really central to a lot of the pedagogy that you see in these kinds of places. And the other thing that they do, which I think you'll see more of, is they combine things together. So this was a project they did to combine art and science, to do sculpture to explain scientific concepts. The first time I went to School 21, the principal there, Peter Hyman, took me into a room which was like a double-sized classroom. They'd taken the wall down, and it looked like complete chaos. I was incredibly depressed because I had arrived at this school, I'd heard so much about it, and this was my first experience of it. He took me into this room, and I thought, this is complete crap. There is no learning going on here at all. There were about 40 kids, and they seemed to be loosely supervised by 3 teachers, and it seemed like chaos. There were people banging drums, there was a lot of noise, there didn't seem to be any structured instruction, so on and so forth. It was a history class studying the rise of totalitarianism, and it was a drama class doing drama GCSE. And then after a little bit, as I kind of sat down and kind of watched and just let it kind of evolve, it became much more apparent what they were doing. They were studying Stalin, Hitler, and the rise of totalitarianism, and they were making a play in a Brechtian-style drama to explain why people would find totalitarianism appealing. Well, if you want to explain a world of Donald Trump, that's quite important, that combination. And what was happening was each group was going to sit with a history teacher for about 20 minutes, where they'd sit on the floor and they'd go through their workbooks and their essays and their written work for their GCSE history. And then they'd go off and they'd prepare their drama with their group, with a drama teacher. And the history was informing the drama, and the drama was embedding the history, because what better way to understand the appeal of totalitarianism than to make a drama of it? And so what they were doing was expanding their knowledge by making something, and doing that socially in groups, but also that requiring, obviously, all sorts of personal skills to contribute to that process. It was a completely dynamic kind of environment, and it looked like chaos. And I don't know if you were an Ofsted inspector, what you would make of it. But actually, it was an incredibly powerful experience, because at the end, the class then forms an audience to which everyone performs their drama, and then they get feedback, orchestrated by the teachers, who are sometimes instructors, but definitely designers and definitely activators. So that is a really good example, it seems to me, of that kind of dynamic combination that we're going to need more of in schools. And what's at stake here is much, much more than PISA. It's much more than ATAR or NAPLAN or any of that. Because actually we're at an incredible inflection point in our relationship with technology, work, income, productivity, and all of that. Because we're about to be blessed, and it probably is a blessing in the long run, with all sorts of intelligent artificial machines which can do all sorts of things as well, if not better, than us. And that is going to have a huge impact on accountancy, law, banking, media, and indeed on teaching. And in a world of all these intelligent, capable machines, of course we need to teach young people and equip them and lead them and enable them to become creative makers using digital technology and adept with all of that. But what we mostly need to do is enable them to be more human. That's what we're going to need to do. In a world which is more technological, we need to be more human. In a world that's more programmed, we need to be capable of being unprogrammed. In a world where more jobs will be about following the script set by computers, we need to be able to write the script or depart from the script. So that is the really big thing, that we have inherited these industrial education systems designed for routine work in routine organizations to follow instructions. And now, actually, the young people we're working with need something different. They need to be able to learn to become agents of change and to become creative problem solvers. And if we don't do that, we'll sell them short. So the real job here is to learn to be more human. That's what we've got to do. Thank you very much indeed.